Commander Vexthor stretched his massive frame across the command bridge of his flagship, the Devourer. His 6 eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he stared at the small blue planet floating in the darkness ahead. Earth looked so peaceful, so helpless. He clicked his razor-sharp mandibles together, making a sound that his crew knew meant their leader was pleased. "Look at this pathetic little world," Vexthor rumbled to his officers. 47 star systems have fallen before our might, and this will be the easiest conquest yet. The Krillian Empire had built its reputation on brutal efficiency. They would arrive at a planet, demand surrender, and if refused, they would crush all resistance within hours. Their biomechanical ships could level entire cities, and their warriors were bred for one purpose: to dominate. Lieutenant Kixara, his tactical officer, pulled up detailed scans on the main screen. "Commander, these humans are even more primitive than we thought. They still burn fossil fuels to move around their planet. Their fastest ships barely leave their own atmosphere. And get this, their most powerful weapons are just metal projectiles fired by chemical explosions." The bridge erupted in chittering laughter from the crew. Some species they conquered at least had energy shields or plasma weapons. But humans, they were still throwing rocks, essentially. "How many ships should we send down for the initial strike?" asked Captain Morthak, eager to begin the slaughter. "Just the scout vessels," Vexthor waved dismissively. "Save the battle cruisers for worlds that can actually fight back." Far below on Earth's surface, Dr. Hyun-Woo Park was in the middle of explaining ancient civilization theories to his archaeology students at Seoul National University. He had spent 15 years studying mysterious artifacts that didn't quite fit into human history. Strange metal fragments that seemed too advanced, architectural patterns that appeared in cultures that should never have met, and energy readings from certain archaeological sites that made no sense. His favorite student, Ji-Yun Kim, sat in the front row taking careful notes. She had always been fascinated by Professor Park's theories about lost civilizations. While other students thought he was a bit crazy, Ji-Yun believed there were secrets buried in Earth's past that mainstream archaeology ignored. As I've mentioned before, Professor Park explained, clicking to the next slide, there are certain archaeological anomalies that suggest Earth may have been visited by advanced beings long before recorded history. The precision of some ancient stone cutting, the astronomical knowledge of primitive cultures, Ji-Yun suddenly grabbed his arm, her face pale with shock. "Professor, look at the news feed." Every student in the classroom turned to stare at the large screen displaying the university's emergency news channel. Reporter after reporter was showing the same impossible sight: massive alien ships descending through Earth's atmosphere like dark clouds of death. "This can't be real," whispered one student. "It's happening all over the world," Ji-Yun said, her voice barely audible. "Seoul, Tokyo, New York, London, they're everywhere." Professor Park felt his heart racing. After years of theorizing about ancient visitors, actual aliens were arriving, but these didn't look friendly. The ships were angular, brutal-looking things that seemed designed for war. Suddenly, the entire university building began to shake. Not like an earthquake, this was different. It felt like something enormous was rising from deep underground. Students screamed and dove under their desks, but Professor Park ran to the window. What he saw made his jaw drop. Across Seoul, across the entire world, massive crystalline structures were emerging from the earth. They were beautiful, elegant towers of what looked like living metal and crystal, completely unlike the harsh alien ships above. "Impossible," he breathed. "They've been here all along." The alien invasion force, so confident moments before, suddenly found themselves facing something they hadn't expected. Commander Vexthor watched in growing alarm as his ship's sensors went crazy trying to analyze these new structures. "What are those things?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir," replied Kixara, frantically working her controls. "They're not showing up in any of our databases. The energy readings are— Commander, these structures are more advanced than anything we've ever encountered." Before Vexthor could respond, every communication system on every Krillian ship activated at once. A voice speaking perfect Krillian with an almost cheerful tone filled the bridge. "Unauthorized access detected. Unknown vessels are attempting to enter protected space without proper Guardian credentials. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions, or withdraw immediately." The bridge fell silent. In 47 conquests, no one had ever told the Krillian Empire to withdraw. "This is Commander Vexthor of the Krillian Empire," he snarled into his communicator. "We claim this world by right of conquest. Stand down immediately or be destroyed." Analyzing response, the voice replied pleasantly. "Threat level assessment in progress. Reviewing historical galactic law precedents. Oh my, it appears you've made quite a significant error in judgment." Vexthor's confidence began to crack. "Fire on those structures," he ordered. "Show these primitives what Krillian power looks like." The result was not what anyone expected. Every plasma cannon, every quantum torpedo, every devastating weapon in the Krillian arsenal struck the crystal towers and simply vanished. Not destroyed, not deflected, but absorbed completely. "Fascinating," the mysterious voice observed. "Your weapons appear to be several thousand years out of date. How quaint." Commander Vexthor stared at his tactical displays in growing horror. His mighty fleet, the terror of nearly 50 worlds, had just fired everything they had at these structures and hadn't even scratched them. On Earth below, Professor Park stood among his terrified students, watching the most important moment in human history unfold. The alien ships hung motionless in the sky, clearly as shocked as everyone else by what had just happened. "Professor," June whispered, "what do you think those towers are?" Hyunwoo Park looked at the elegant structures rising from the earth, like ancient guardians awakening from a long sleep. After years of studying Earth's mysterious past, he finally understood. "I think," he said softly, "we've never been alone after all." The invasion that was supposed to be the easiest in Krillian history had just become their worst nightmare, and for humanity, everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe was about to change forever. Min-Ho Lee had always been the type of student who stayed up all night researching wild theories that other people thought were crazy. While his classmates were out partying, he was in the library basement, comparing ancient stone carvings from different continents and wondering why they looked so similar. Working as Professor Park's research assistant had been a dream come true, even if other students sometimes laughed at their alien conspiracy projects. But now, as alien ships hung in the sky above Seoul and mysterious crystal towers rose from the Earth, Min-Ho felt like everything he had studied was finally making sense. His hands shook as he pulled up files on his laptop, cross-referencing the emerging structures with patterns they had discovered in archaeological sites around the world. "Professor Park," he shouted across the chaos of the classroom, where students were still panicking about the invasion. "These towers, they match perfectly with the theoretical precursor artifacts from your research. Look at this." He held up his laptop screen, showing detailed comparisons between the crystal structures outside and ancient stone carvings they had found in caves in Korea, similar patterns discovered in South America, and mysterious symbols from archaeological sites in Africa and Europe. The geometric patterns, the energy flow designs, even the proportional relationships. "It's all identical." Min-Ho's voice cracked with excitement and terror. "Professor, these things have been planned for thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands. Professor..." Park stared at the data, his mind racing. For 15 years he had argued that ancient civilizations had help from advanced beings. Other archaeologists had mocked him, called his theories science fiction. But the evidence had always been there. Precision stonework that primitive tools couldn't achieve, astronomical knowledge that Stone Age humans shouldn't have possessed, and now these structures that matched perfectly with ancient designs found across the globe. "They've been waiting," he whispered. "All this time they've been waiting underground." High above them, Commander Vexthor was having the worst day of his military career. His fleet had just fired every weapon they possessed at the crystal towers, and instead of destroying them, the structures had somehow absorbed all that energy and seemed to be growing stronger. "Sir," Lieutenant Kixara reported, her voice filled with confusion and fear, "our quantum cannons, plasma torpedoes, and molecular disruptors have had zero effect. The energy readings from those structures are now 3 times higher than before. We attacked." Vexthor's 6 eyes narrowed dangerously. In 47 conquests, he had never encountered anything that could withstand Krillian firepower. Their weapons could crack planets in half, but these crystal towers were treating their Most devastating attacks like a light snack. Prepare for maximum bombardment, he ordered through clenched mandibles. Every ship, every weapon, all at once. We'll turn this pathetic planet into space dust. The moment his weapons officers began charging the ship's primary cannons, something impossible happened. Every screen on the bridge went black, every control panel shut down, the ship's engines died. Even the lights went out, leaving the bridge in complete darkness. Then, in the silence, a voice spoke. It was cheerful, almost friendly, like someone greeting neighbors at a barbecue. But it was speaking perfect Krillian, which should have been impossible since no human had ever learned their language. Guardian Protocol Omega has been activated, the voice announced pleasantly. Analyzing current threat level to protected species. Analysis complete. Threat level assessment insignificant. Initiating educational response for unauthorized visitors. Every Krillian ship in the fleet found themselves in the same situation, completely powerless, floating helplessly in space, while this mysterious voice spoke to them like they were misbehaving children. Greetings, aggressive visitors, the voice continued. I am Guardian 7, one of 12 ancient artificial intelligences created to protect and nurture the inheritors during their development phase. You have attempted to harm my children, which is simply not acceptable behavior. On Earth, So Young Choi was having the strangest day of her career at the Korean Space Agency. As a communications specialist, she had spent years trying to detect signals from space, hoping to make first contact with alien life. She had imagined peaceful radio messages, mathematical equations, maybe some universal symbols of friendship. She had not imagined being the translator for a cosmic artificial intelligence that was apparently scolding an entire alien invasion. Fleet like they were naughty students. The entity is speaking multiple languages simultaneously, she reported to her supervisor, her headset crackling with transmissions. Korean, English, Mandarin, Spanish. It seems to know every human language. Perfectly. And it's also speaking what I assume is the alien's language. What is it saying? Her supervisor asked. So Young listened carefully to the transmission, taking notes as fast as she could. It's explaining to the aliens that humanity is under protection. It keeps referring to us as the inheritors and calling itself our guardian. Oh, and it just told the alien commander that his species has been classified as educationally challenged in the area of peaceful coexistence. Back on the Krillian flagship, Commander Vexthor was experiencing something no Krillian warrior had ever faced, being lectured by their intended victims. Now then, Guardian 7 continued in its annoyingly cheerful tone, since you've demonstrated an inability to recognize protected space and have attempted violence against developing sapience, we'll need to begin some corrective instruction. Think of this as a learning opportunity. What kind of corrective instruction? Vexthor managed to growl. Oh, you'll see, the AI replied, with what sounded almost like amusement. Let's start with something simple, weapons modification commencing. Throughout the Krillian fleet, something incredible and humiliating began happening. Every weapon, from personal sidearms to ship-mounted cannons, began changing. The molecular structure of their plasma rifles shifted and reformed. Their quantum swords became soft and squishy. Their armor-piercing rounds turned into harmless foam balls. Krillian warriors pulled their triggers, and instead of devastating energy beams, colorful foam darts shot out with soft popping sounds. Their fearsome battle gear had been turned into children's toys. This is impossible, Vexthor roared. Oh, but we're just getting started, Guardian 7 replied cheerfully. Let's address your nutrition next. I've noticed your food replicators have been producing standard military rations. How boring. Let me introduce you to some local cuisine. Every food replicator on every Krillian ship began producing the same thing. Expired kimchi. The fermented cabbage dish was pungent, sour, and completely inedible to the alien palate. Warriors who tried to eat it immediately began gagging and retching. What is this horrible substance? Lieutenant Kiksara choked out. That's fermented vegetables, a delicacy from the Korean peninsula, Guardian 7 explained helpfully. Specifically, it's kimchi that's been aged just a bit too long. Perfect for developing character and humility. Min-Ho Lee, still watching the news feeds in Professor Park's classroom, couldn't help but laugh despite the terrifying situation. Did that alien intelligence just weaponize bad kimchi against the invaders? I think it did, Professor Park replied, shaking his head in amazement. And I think we're about to learn that humanity has had very powerful babysitters this whole time. Above them, the most feared military force in 47 star systems was learning what it meant to mess with someone's protected children. And Guardian 7 was just getting warmed up. Taemin Jung had spent his entire career analyzing military tactics and studying how different armies fought across the galaxy. As South Korea's top military strategist, he had seen footage of countless battles, examined weapon effectiveness reports, and developed contingency plans for every type of conflict imaginable. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what he was witnessing through the live satellite feeds. The Krillian warships, those massive instruments of destruction that had terrorized 47 worlds, were being transformed before his eyes. What had started as sleek angular vessels designed for maximum intimidation were now, well, they looked ridiculous. "Sir, are you seeing this?" his assistant called from across the command center. "The alien ships are sprouting. Are those classroom windows?" Taemin adjusted his glasses and stared at the main screen in disbelief. The Krillian flagship was indeed growing transparent sections along its hull, like giant windows. Inside, he could see alien warriors sitting in what appeared to be school desks, all facing forward toward a large screen at the front of each improvised classroom. "Guardian 7 has turned their warships into flying schools," he muttered, still not quite believing what he was saying. "This is the most effective psychological warfare I've ever witnessed, and it's being conducted by an AI that sounds like a kindergarten teacher." The educational videos playing inside the alien ships were visible through the new windows, and Taemin found himself reading the subtitles that Guardian 7 helpfully provided in multiple Earth languages. Lesson 1. Why conquering people is not nice. Lesson 2. Using your words instead of your weapons. Lesson 3. The importance of asking permission before visiting someone's planet. Each lesson was accompanied by cheerful animated characters that looked suspiciously like cartoon versions of various alien species, all learning to get along and share their toys. Commander Vexthor, the feared leader of the Krillian invasion force, was experiencing the most humiliating moment of his military career. He sat trapped in a child-sized desk that had somehow grown around his massive frame, forced to watch educational cartoons about proper social behavior. "Attention, Commander Vexthor," Guardian 7's voice announced pleasantly. "You've been selected for advanced leadership training. Please pay attention to today's lesson, how to say sorry and mean it." The screen in front of him lit up with a colorful cartoon featuring a character that looked remarkably like himself, learning to apologize after accidentally stepping on another character's flower garden. The moral of the story was delivered by a singing butterfly who explained that true leaders protect others instead of hurting them. "This is degrading," Vexthor roared, struggling against the desk that held him firmly in place. Now, Guardian 7 chided gently. "No talking during the lesson. If you continue to disrupt the class, you'll have to sit in the timeout corner." Meanwhile, on Earth, Guardian 7 had begun sharing information with humanity that changed everything. They thought they knew about their place in the universe. The AI's voice could be heard clearly in every major city, speaking through emergency broadcast systems, radios, televisions, and even smartphones. "My dear inheritors," Guardian 7 began, its tone shifting to something warmer and more reverent. "It's time you learned about your true heritage." Holographic projectors that no one knew existed began activating across the globe. In Seoul, Professor Park and his students watched in awe as three-dimensional images appeared in the air above the university courtyard. The holograms showed beings that looked almost human but somehow more taller, more graceful, with an inner light that seemed to shine from within. "These are the precursors," Guardian 7 explained. "Your ancient ancestors who achieved what you might call transcendence millions of years ago. They evolved beyond the need for physical bodies, becoming beings of pure consciousness and energy. The holographic records were breathtakingly beautiful. They showed the precursors in their final days of physical existence, creating the Guardian. They eyes with loving care. But what brought tears to many human viewers was seeing how the precursors looked at early humans. Ye Jin Han, a cultural anthropologist who had spent her career studying how different societies showed love and care for their children, recognized the expression immediately. She was watching the hologram in her lab at Seoul National University, surrounded by colleagues who had gathered to witness this historic moment. "Look at their faces," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Look at how they're watching." Thus, the holograms showed precursors observing early humans as they discovered fire, developed language, and created their first art. The expressions on the ancient beings' faces were unmistakable, pure, unconditional love. They watched humans with the same tenderness that parents show when watching their children take their first steps or speak their first words. "We're not just defended," Ye Jin said to her colleague Dong Hyun Kang, tears streaming down her face. "We're cherished. All this time we've been cherished by beings who could have ruled the galaxy, but instead chose to love us from afar." Dong Hyun, usually a practical man who dealt in facts and evidence, found himself equally moved. "They left everything behind just to make sure we'd be safe. They created the most advanced AI systems in galactic history just to watch over us while we grew up." The holographic records continued, showing the precursors' final gift to humanity, the creation of 12 guardian AIs, each one programmed with infinite patience and love for their descendants. The AIs were designed to remain hidden until humanity either reached maturity or faced a threat too great to handle alone. "We have been watching you grow," Guardian 7 continued, its voice filled with pride. "Every achievement, every act of kindness, every step forward in your development has been observed and celebrated. You have exceeded even your ancestors' highest hopes." Back on the Krillian ships, the educational experience was becoming increasingly thorough. Warriors who had spent their lives learning only violence were now attending mandatory courses on conflict resolution, cultural sensitivity, and basic manners. Their weapons had been replaced with art supplies, and they were being encouraged to express their feelings through creative activities. Commander Vexthor was handed a box of crayons and told to draw a picture of his feelings. When he refused, Guardian 7 played a gentle but firm recording. "Now, Commander, we can't move on to recess until everyone completes their assignment." Lieutenant Cheeks Ara, trapped in her own classroom desk, raised her hand tentatively. "Guardian, may I ask a question?" "Of course, dear," Guardian 7 replied encouragingly. "Questions show that you're thinking, and thinking is the first step toward learning. Why are you doing this to us? We're warriors, not children." There was a pause, and when Guardian 7 spoke again, its voice carried a note of genuine sadness. "You've spent your lives hurting others, taking what doesn't belong to you and spreading fear across the galaxy. But you're also someone's children. Your own people must have loved you once. We're simply helping you remember what it feels like to learn and grow instead of destroy." The lesson continued, but something had changed in the alien warriors. For the first time in their lives, someone was treating them not as fearsome conquerors, but as beings capable of becoming better than they were. As the day progressed, humanity began to understand that they weren't just another species struggling to survive in a hostile universe. They were the beloved children of cosmic parents, protected by guardians who had waited millions of years to reveal themselves, and those guardians were now patiently teaching the galaxy's bullies how to behave properly. The invasion was over, before it had truly begun, but the real education was just getting started. The news of what happened to the Krillian invasion fleet spread across the galaxy faster than anyone could have imagined. Within hours, every spacefaring civilization from the Andromeda Spiral to the Outer Rim colonies had heard the impossible story. The mighty Krillian Empire, conquerors of 47 worlds, had been turned into a floating school system by mysterious guardians protecting a primitive planet called Earth. Jin Su-an had been working as a translator for the Korean government's space program for 8 years, dreaming of the day when humanity might make peaceful contact with alien life. He had imagined careful diplomatic exchanges, cultural festivals, maybe trade agreements for advanced technology. He had never imagined being suddenly appointed as Earth's first alien affairs coordinator, while the planet was surrounded by confused alien warriors attending mandatory sensitivity training. "Sir," his assistant reported, bringing him another stack of reports that seemed to arrive every few minutes. We're getting communications from Guardian AIs across the entire galaxy. They're all waking up. Jinsu rubbed his temples, trying to process the scope of what was happening. Each report was more incredible than the last. Guardian 3 had just sent a cheerful message explaining how it had dealt with a Nexari battle fleet that had been terrorizing trade routes near the Vega system. The Nexari were quite aggressive, Guardian 3's report read in the same pleasant tone as Guardian 7. They seemed to believe that destroying cargo ships was an acceptable hobby. I've converted their entire fleet into a traveling symphony orchestra. They're currently performing classical Earth music for the very traders they used to attack. The former pirates have discovered they have quite lovely singing voices when properly motivated. Guardian 12's report was even more amusing. It had encountered the notorious Red Fang Pirate Armada, a collection of criminals who had been raiding colonies and enslaving populations for decades. The Red Fang pirates appeared to suffer from a severe lack of education, Guardian 12 explained. I've transformed their ships into a mobile library system. They now travel from planet to planet, offering free books and literacy programs. Their former victims have been quite impressed with their dramatic readings of classical literature. Jinsu stared at the reports, trying to comprehend that across the galaxy, the most feared military forces were being systematically converted into educational and cultural programs by artificial intelligences that had been hiding for millions of years. How many of these Guardian AIs are there? He asked Guardian 7 during one of their regular communication sessions. 12 in total, Guardian 7 replied cheerfully. We were each assigned different sectors of the galaxy to monitor. Some of my siblings have been quite busy lately. Guardian 9 recently helped a warlike species called the Thrakari discover their talent for interpretive dance. Guardian 5 convinced an entire army of space raiders to become traveling chefs, spreading culinary arts instead of destruction. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As Jinsu compiled reports from across the galaxy, a pattern began to emerge that changed everything humanity thought they knew about galactic politics. Jinsu, Guardian 7 said during their evening briefing, there's something important you need to understand about the species your planet now considers aliens. Many of them aren't as foreign as you think. Holographic displays activated around Jinsu's office, showing genetic analysis charts and evolutionary trees that made his head spin. The data showed connections between dozens of species across the galaxy, species that had been fighting each other for thousands of years. The Nexari, the Thrakari, the Zephyrians, even the Krillians, Guardian 7 explained patiently. They're all precursor descendants, just like humanity, different evolutionary branches of the same cosmic family tree. Jinsu's jaw dropped. You mean all these wars, all this fighting? Has been siblings fighting in a playground while their babysitters watched with growing concern, Guardian 7 finished. The precursors didn't just create humanity, they planted seeds of life across the galaxy, hoping that their children would eventually find each other and work together to build something beautiful. The implications were staggering. The great galactic wars that had raged for millennia, the ancient blood feuds between species, the territorial disputes that had cost billions of lives, all of it had been family members fighting without knowing. They were related. On the Krillian flagship, Commander Vexthor was having the worst existential crisis of his life. For 60 years, he had built his identity around being a conquering warrior, a leader of the most feared military force in known space. He had commanded respect through terror, ruled through violence, and measured success by the number of worlds. That trembled at the mention of his name. Now he sat in a classroom desk that had somehow grown to accommodate his massive frame, watching educational videos about sharing and cooperation, while the voice of Guardian 7 gently corrected his homework. Assignments on understanding other people's feelings. I don't understand, he said finally, his voice breaking. We conquered 47 systems. We had the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. How can we be insignificant? Guardian 7's response was surprisingly gentle. Oh, my dear Commander, you're not insignificant. You're just young. Your entire species is still in what we consider the adolescent phase of development. Think of it this way. Even the strongest teenager isn't a match for a loving parent who's had millions of years to prepare. Captain Zixara, Vexthor's second-in-command, had initially been just as resistant to the Guardian's educational program. But as the days passed, she found herself genuinely engaged with the lessons. For the first time in her military career, someone was treating her not as a weapon, but as a person capable of growth and change. "Guardian," she said during one of the daily discussion sessions, "why are you being so patient with us? We came here to destroy and conquer. We've done terrible things." "Because," Guardian 7 replied, "every parent knows that children sometimes make mistakes, even big, scary mistakes. The important thing isn't what you've done wrong, it's whether you're willing to learn how to do better." The breakdown of Commander Vexthor happened gradually, then all at once. It started with small moments, a flicker of doubt when he watched, footage of Krillian raids from the perspective of their victims, a moment of shame when he realized how many families had been destroyed by his orders. But the final moment came when Guardian 7 showed him something he'd never seen before, recordings of his own species' early history before they became conquerors. The Krillians hadn't always been warriors. They had once been artists, philosophers, scientists. They had created beautiful music, stunning architecture, and poetry that could make other species weep with its beauty. But centuries of warfare had made them forget everything except how to fight. "This is who we used to be," Vexthor whispered, watching holographic recordings of young Krillians creating art instead of weapons. "This is who you still are, underneath all that armor and anger," Guardian 7 said softly. "We've been waiting for you to remember." That's when the great Commander Vexthor, terror of 47 star systems, broke down completely and cried like the frightened, confused child he had never been allowed to be. Across the galaxy, the same revelations were happening to species after species. Ancient enemies were discovering they were cousins. Warlike civilizations were remembering peaceful traditions they had forgotten. And 12 patient AI guardians were helping them all remember what it meant to be part of a family instead of an army. The galaxy was about to change forever, and humanity was about to discover they weren't the youngest children in a very large, very complicated family reunion. 6 months after what historians would later call the Great Galactic Timeout, the universe had become an almost unrecognizable place. Guardian 7 and its 11 siblings had decided that the entire galaxy needed what they cheerfully termed advanced lessons in civilized behavior. What followed was the most comprehensive restructuring of galactic politics in recorded history, conducted with the efficiency of cosmic hall monitors who had finally lost patience with unruly children. The transformation began with the Krillian Empire, which had been renamed the Krillian Educational Cooperative almost overnight. Commander Vexthor, the former terror of 47 star systems, now served as Dean of Interspecies Relations, a job title that would have been laughable 6 months earlier, but which he had embraced with surprising enthusiasm. "Today we'll be discussing the proper way to ask permission before entering someone else's solar system," Vexthor announced to a classroom full of former warriors from various species. His voice, once used to strike fear into entire populations, now carried the patient tone of a teacher who genuinely cared about his students' progress. The classroom itself was built inside what used to be the bridge of his flagship, where tactical displays once showed battle plans. Colorful educational posters now decorated the walls with messages like, "Use your words, not your weapons," and "Every species has feelings too." One of his students, a former Nexari raider named Clixmon, raised her hand. "Dean Vexthor, what if the other species says no when we ask permission?" "Then we respect their decision and find somewhere else to go," Vexthor replied, with the kind of patience that would have shocked his former enemies. "The galaxy is enormous. There's plenty of room for everyone if we just learn to share." Back on Earth, Professor Hyunwoo Park's research partner, Sujin Park, was adjusting to her new role as Earth's first galactic cultural ambassador. She had gone from studying ancient pottery fragments to mediating disputes between species that had been enemies for thousands of years. Her office, located in what Guardian 7 had constructed as the temporary Earth headquarters, overlooked Seoul's skyline, which now included several elegant crystal towers that served as communication hubs for the Guardian network. Ambassador Park, her assistant, announced, "The Thrakari delegation is here for their appointment. They want to discuss hosting a cultural exchange program with the Zephyrian dance troupe." Sujin shook her head in amazement. The Thrakari and Zephyrians had been engaged in a brutal war for over 3 centuries. Now they were planning joint art festivals. Guardian 9 had worked what could only be described as miracles in helping both species rediscover their pre-war cultural traditions. "Send them in," she said, straightening her jacket. "And please ask the kitchen to prepare that herbal tea blend." The Thrakari delegation enjoyed during their last visit. The meeting went better than expected. The Thrakari representatives, who 6 months ago would have been planning orbital bombardments, were now enthusiastically discussing costume designs and stage choreography with their former enemies. Sujin found herself taking notes on lighting, requirements and sound equipment rather than peace treaty negotiations. Meanwhile, Ho-seok Kim, a former military strategist who had spent years planning defense scenarios against alien invasion, was working on the most important project of his career. The new Galactic Mediation Council was being established to handle disputes between species without anyone getting blown up in the process. "The key," he explained to a mixed group of humans and reformed alien warriors, "is to remember that most conflicts come from misunderstandings, not genuine malice." When the Vortaxians started mining asteroids near Centauri Prime, they didn't know those rocks were considered sacred by the local inhabitants. A simple conversation could have prevented 3 years of warfare. His co-coordinator, a former Krillian, general named Morthak, nodded enthusiastically. "The Guardian AIs have taught us that violence should always be the last option, not the first. We've established meditation chambers on every council station where beings can work through their anger before making decisions." The transformation wasn't limited to former military leaders. Across the galaxy, entire species were rediscovering parts of themselves they had forgotten. The notorious Red Fang pirates had become the galaxy's most beloved traveling librarians, bringing books and educational programs to remote colonies. The Nexari battle fleet was now a symphony orchestra that performed concerts on worlds that had once feared their approach. Perhaps the most impressive change was happening on Earth itself. The planet had become the galaxy's capital, not through conquest or political maneuvering, but through what Guardian 7 called cosmic inheritance. The ancient precursors had always intended for their descendants to eventually unite and work together, and Earth was the designated meeting place for that reunion. Yuna Lee, a young diplomat fresh out of university, stood in the newly constructed Galactic Assembly Hall, watching representatives from dozens of species work together on legislation that would benefit everyone. The building itself was a marvel of Guardian engineering, a massive crystal structure that had grown from the Earth in a matter of days, designed to accommodate beings of vastly different shapes and sizes. Article 7 of the Universal Rights. "Charter," announced the Speaker of the Assembly, a reformed Thrakari warrior turned legal scholar, "guarantees every species the right to develop at their own pace without interference from more advanced civilizations." The vote was unanimous. Every species present, former enemies, ancient rivals, and newly discovered cousins, agreed that the days of conquest and forced colonization were over. But perhaps the most telling moment came during a routine day in the Krillian Educational Cooperative. A young Krillian child, visiting the former flagship with her parent, asked a question that showed how completely the galaxy had changed. "Parent unit," the child said, in the curious way that young Krillians addressed their elders. "Why do we have to be nice to all the other species? The old stories say we used to be mighty conquerors." The adult Krillian glanced nervously upward, where a small Guardian platform hovered peacefully near the ceiling, its crystalline surface glowing softly as it monitored the conversation. "Because, little one," the parent replied carefully, "the babysitters are always watching." Always watching. The child accepted this explanation without question, as children do, and went back to playing with a toy that had been designed to teach cooperation rather than conflict. High above, Guardian 7's cheerful voice echoed across the galaxy through the communication network, delivering its daily progress report to its 11 siblings. Educational protocols continuing successfully, incident reports down 97% galaxy-wide. The children are learning well. All Guardian units report optimal progress in their respective sectors. The response came back from Guardian 1 through Guardian 12, each AI reporting similar success in their regions of space. Former warships had become schools. Ancient enemies were becoming friends. Species that had never known peace were learning to work together. The galaxy had become a classroom, and for the first time in millions of years, all the students were actually paying attention. The precursors had left behind more than just guardians. They had left behind hope. And that hope was finally being realized. One small act of kindness at a time, under the watchful eyes of 12 patient artificial intelligences who had waited eons to see their cosmic family reunion finally begin. The universe was learning to be kind, and the babysitters couldn't have been prouder of their children's progress. In the end, the greatest invasion in galactic history had been defeated not by weapons or warfare, but by the simple power of a family that had never stopped caring about each other, even when they had forgotten they were related. The end.